Hello, everyone. Tonight, we're diving into a story of family loss and unexpected decisions. Picture this: the funeral flowers were still wilting on the grave when my daughter walked in with an ultimatum that would change everything. If you've ever felt like the weight of the world came crashing down all at once, this story might resonate with you. Stick around till the end and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from so I can see how far this story has reached. The funeral flowers were still wilting on Dante's grave when my daughter Harlow delivered her ultimatum. I was standing in my kitchen, still wearing my black dress, my hands trembling as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. 3 weeks had passed since my husband's funeral. 3 weeks since I had said goodbye to the love of my life. And now here I was, facing the cold, hard truth. Harlow walked in with that look on her face, the one that told me she had already made up her mind and that my feelings didn't matter. She set her designer purse down on the kitchen counter with a sharp, deliberate click. At 42, Harlow had inherited her father's strong jawline, but none of his warmth. She was beautiful in a way that could freeze a person, and in that moment, she looked every bit the successful woman I had always hoped she would become. But right now, all I saw was a stranger standing before me. "Mom, we need to talk," she said, her voice crisp, businesslike. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the loss still heavy on my chest. "What's this about honey?" I managed to say. "This arrangement isn't working anymore," Harlow continued, her words cutting through the air like a knife. "You living here in my house, it's just not feasible. Daddy left everything to me, remember? And I can't afford to support you anymore." My heart sank. The coffee cup in my hand slipped from my fingers, shattering against the tile floor, sending brown liquid spilling across the white ceramic pieces like my life slowly crumbling apart. My knees ached as I knelt down to pick up the pieces, trying to keep my composure, but failing miserably. The weight of her words hit me harder than anything I had ever imagined. "Harlow, it's only been 3 weeks since your father died," I whispered, my voice trembling as the grief threatened to consume me. "How could you say that to me?" She didn't even flinch. "I know, Mom," she said, not even looking at the mess on the floor. "But life goes on. I have my own family, my own bills to worry about. I can't take care of you anymore." I sat there unable to speak, unable to process what she was saying. This was my daughter, the little girl who had crawled into my bed during thunderstorms, the young woman who had always seemed to need me. But now she was telling me that I was no longer wanted, no longer needed. I had lost my husband, and now in a matter of days, I was losing my daughter too. My heart felt as though it were being torn from my chest. I had always thought that family was something that could never break, but now I wasn't so sure. Mom, Harlow continued, her tone hardening. "I've been thinking about this, and I have a solution." I looked up at her, my mind still trying to wrap around what she had just said. "A solution?" She nodded, pulling out her phone and showing me something on the screen. "There's a job, private nursing. The pay is excellent, and it's something you can handle. You were a nurse before you married Dad. It's perfect." I stared at the phone, at the listing for a job caring for a man who needed round-the-clock assistance. But my mind was reeling. "I haven't worked as a nurse in over 40 years, Harlow," I said, my voice shaking. "I don't know if I'm qualified anymore. And this, nursing a stranger, I don't even know if I can do it." She sighed, rolling her eyes in a way that made me feel small. "It's not medical nursing, Mom. It's more about companionship, helping with daily activities. You can do that. You always help Dad with his medication, his meals. This is no different." Her words were an echo of the helplessness I was feeling. I knew she was right. My only option was to accept the job or find somewhere else to live. But how could she do this to me? After all these years, after everything I had done for her, she was giving me an ultimatum. I wasn't sure if I was angry or heartbroken. Maybe both. I already contacted them. Harlow continued, her voice now firm. You have an interview tomorrow. If you don't get the job, well, then you'll need to find somewhere else to stay. The finality of her words left me speechless. As she turned to leave, I remained in the kitchen, my mind numb. What had happened to the daughter I had raised? Where had she gone? All I wanted was to grieve, to find some semblance of peace in the wake of Dante's death. But instead I found myself with nowhere to go, nowhere to turn. As I stared at the shards of the broken coffee cups scattered across the floor, I made a decision. I had no choice. I would go to the interview, try to make something of this strange new chapter in my life. But no matter what happened next, I would never forget the way Harlow had treated me. And I would never forget that in the end, the woman I had loved so much had cast me aside without a second thought. The next morning, I found myself standing in front of a mansion that looked like it belonged to a movie set. The driveway alone was longer than the entire street I used to live on, and the house itself was a sprawling estate. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and high ceilings that seemed to stretch forever. As I stood there trying to steady my shaking hands, I couldn't help but wonder how my life had led me here. A few days ago, I had been standing in my own kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of my past, and now I was here knocking on the door of a complete stranger's home, applying for a job that I wasn't sure I could handle. I took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. The door opened almost immediately, revealing a stern-looking woman in her 50s, dressed in a crisp black suit. She introduced herself as Patricia, the house manager, and with a cool smile, invited me inside. The interior of the house was even more intimidating than the outside. The floors were polished marble, and the walls were lined with paintings art that probably cost more than I had made in my entire life. I felt out of place here, like an intruder in a world I could never belong to. Yet, as I followed Patricia through the halls, something in me couldn't help but admire the elegance of it all. It was a world that I had never known, one I had never imagined would be mine. But today, it seemed like my only option. Patricia led me through long corridors and up a staircase to a set of double doors, pausing just before she entered. Mr. Hawthorne requires assistance with most daily activities, she explained. He's paralyzed from the waist down following an accident 5 years ago. The position includes room and board, plus a very generous salary. A part of me wanted to run. I hadn't been a caregiver in over 40 years, and now I was about to meet a man who needed someone to take care of him. I wasn't sure I was capable of that anymore. But then I reminded myself this was my only choice. There was no turning back now. Before we go in, Patricia continued, I should warn you, Mr. Hawthorne can be difficult. He's had 17 caregivers in the past 2 years. 17. The number hung in the air, sending a chill down my spine. What had I gotten myself into? Patricia opened the doors, revealing a massive library with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking perfectly manicured gardens. And there, sitting in a wheelchair by the window, was a man who must have been once devastatingly handsome. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his posture was straight, but there was a weight in his expression that made him seem older than his years. His eyes were deep blue, the kind of blue you see only in old photographs or faded memories. Mr. Hawthorne, this is Hilda Thompson, the candidate we discussed. Patricia said, her voice as professional as ever. He turned his wheelchair to face us, and when his eyes met mine, a strange, unsettling sensation washed over me. Recognition, confusion. I couldn't tell, but there was something in his gaze that made my heart race. I sat down in the chair across from him, trying to compose myself, but my hands wouldn't stop trembling. Mrs. Thompson, he said, his voice deep and cultured, with just a hint of something I couldn't place. Please sit down. As I lowered myself into the chair, I couldn't help but feel the weight of his gaze still on me. There was something about him that seemed familiar, something I couldn't put my finger on. He studied me, his intense gaze never wavering. "I understand you were a nurse, Mrs. Thompson," he said, his voice cutting through the silence. "But your husband recently passed away." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "Yes, it's been difficult." He nodded slowly. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said, his tone softer now. His eyes never left mine, though, as if he were searching for something or someone. Harlow's face flashed in my mind, the cruel ultimatum she had given me only hours before. But in this moment, I didn't want to think about her. I didn't want to think about the house I had lost, the daughter I had raised, and now barely recognized. I just wanted to get through this interview, get the job, and find a way to survive. I focused on Mr. Hawthorne, trying to ignore the strange sensation that was building in my chest. The truth was, I hadn't been sure I could do this. But now, as I sat across from him, there was something in his eyes that made me feel alive, perhaps for the first time since Dante had passed away. I forced myself to speak. "I may be out of practice," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "But I believe I can be of help. I'm not afraid of difficult situations. I can adapt." There was a long pause before he spoke again, his voice low, almost reluctant. "I'll be honest, Mrs. Thompson. I've had 17 caregivers in the past 2 years. Each of them has left for one reason or another, and frankly, I don't trust easily. But if you take this position, you'll be treated with respect. You'll be paid well. Very well." He named a salary that made my head spin more than I had ever earned in my entire life. I took a deep breath. "I understand," I said, my voice steadier now. "I can do this." He extended his hand to shake mine. When our fingers touched, I felt a strange jolt of electricity shoot through me. I pulled my hand back quickly, but I couldn't ignore the feeling, the sense that something had just shifted in my life. "Welcome to my home, Mrs. Thompson," he said quietly. As Patricia showed me to my quarters later that evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life had just taken a turn I wasn't prepared for. Was it because of the job? Or was it because of the man I had just met? I wasn't sure, but I had a sinking feeling that I was about to discover something I had spent 48 years trying to forget. My first few days at the Hawthorne mansion felt like a blur. Each morning I woke up in the guest quarters, a room far more lavish than anything I'd ever had, and would prepare for the day ahead. I knew this was my reality now, no turning back. I had to remind myself that I wasn't just here to exist. I was here to survive. I could see how demanding Mr. Hawthorne was right away. The job was much more than I had expected, and the luxury of the house only added weight to the responsibility. Everything had to be done to perfection. His coffee had to be at exactly 7:15 a.m., his medication at 8:00, and don't even think about being a minute late. He was meticulous about the smallest of details, and I quickly learned that every task, every little thing mattered. But it wasn't all rigid demands. In those quiet moments when he wasn't watching me or directing my every move, I began to sense that there was more to him than the cold, distant man I had first met. Sometimes I would catch him staring out the window as if lost in his thoughts, his gaze far away. And other times he would ask me questions about my life, about Dante, about how I was coping. It was clear he was lonely, perhaps as lonely as I was, though we carried our solitude in different ways. On the fourth day after I had prepared his breakfast and was arranging the newspapers, he looked at me with that intense gaze of his. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, his voice softer than usual, "tell me more about your family." I froze for a moment, surprised by the question. Why did he want to know about my family? I had always kept that part of my life private, but then again, here I was in his home, answering to his every need. I gathered myself and sat down across from him. "Well, I have a daughter, Harlow. She's grown now, has her own family. I said the words slipping from my mouth like they weren't mine. And your husband, Mr. Hawthorne asked gently. I felt a sharp pang in my chest at the mention of Dante. He had been a good man, a steady man, and I had spent 45 years with him. I quickly pushed the emotions back. He passed away recently, I replied softly, my voice catching a bit. Cancer. I'm sorry, he said, his eyes softening. It was the first time I had heard such genuine sympathy from him. For a brief moment, I felt as if he understood, and I wondered if he was carrying a similar loneliness. Thank you, I whispered, not sure how to continue the conversation. The silence hung between us thick and palpable. But then he broke it. Harlow, he began, his tone suddenly shifting to a more businesslike manner. Has she been difficult? I felt my chest tighten at the mention of my daughter. It wasn't as if Harlow and I had been estranged before, but our relationship had been strained ever since her father passed. She's been upset, I replied, unsure of how to frame it. After her father's funeral, I had to stay with her for a while. But she made it clear that I wasn't wanted there. Mr. Hawthorne nodded slowly. I see, he said, his eyes never leaving mine. I'm sorry you're going through that. There was something in his voice, something that suggested he understood more than he was letting on. He was, after all, a man who had experienced loss, even if he never spoke about it directly. I'm sorry for bringing it up, he said quickly, as if realizing he'd gone too far. You don't have to share more than you want to. No, I said quickly, it's fine. I don't mind talking about it. It's just hard sometimes. We sat in silence for a moment, and I couldn't help but wonder if perhaps we had both been hiding from something, hiding from the loneliness that had crept into our lives after the people we loved were gone. Later that evening, after I had taken care of Mr. Hawthorne's dinner, I found myself in my room sitting by the window. The mansion was beautiful, but it felt hollow, empty. The life I had known, the life I had worked so hard to build with Dante, was gone. I was now just a caregiver in a stranger's mansion, keeping to myself as I navigated this new reality. I couldn't help but think about Harlow again. Why had she been so cold to me, after everything I had done for her, after raising her, giving her everything I could? Why had she turned on me? I had been a good mother, hadn't I? Why couldn't she see that? The questions gnawed at me, and for a brief moment I considered leaving. But I didn't have anywhere to go. My savings were running thin, and with the way Harlow had made it clear she didn't want me around, I had no choice but to stay here. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The thoughts of my daughter, the emptiness of my past life, and the strange pull I felt towards Mr. Hawthorne haunted me. I had made it this far, survived the death of my husband, dealt with the rejection from my daughter, and now this strange new chapter with a man I had never expected to meet again. But could I really do this? Could I spend the rest of my life as a caregiver living in someone else's home? Or was there more waiting for me out there? I wasn't sure, but I knew one thing. I had to keep moving forward. I couldn't afford to dwell on the past. As I drifted off to sleep that night, a thought lingered in my mind. Perhaps this was my second chance. Maybe in the midst of all the loss and heartbreak, I would find a new path, one that would lead me to a life I could never have imagined. The days that followed were filled with the quiet rhythm of routine. Mr. Hawthorne's demands never ceased: his meals at the exact same times, his medications on schedule, his coffee prepared to his precise liking. But despite the rigidity of his requests, there were moments, fleeting but undeniable, when I saw glimpses of the man he once was. Occasionally, he would drop his formal demeanor and let something more vulnerable slip through. His eyes would soften for a brief second, and the chill in his voice would melt away, leaving behind something that reminded me of the man I had once known. But the most profound change wasn't in him, it was in me. I had been living a life dictated by others for far too long. First, it was my husband's illness. Then it was Harlow's constant demands. After Dante passed, Harlow made it clear that my place in her life was no longer assured, that I was a burden rather than a mother. Yet here I was in this mansion caring for a man who had his own burdens, his own story of loss. One morning, I woke up with a different kind of clarity. I had lived my entire life trying to fit into others' expectations. I was always playing a role, wife, mother, caregiver, never allowing myself the freedom to simply be. But now, in this unfamiliar house with its polished marble floors and enormous rooms, I felt like I could finally breathe. Maybe it wasn't ideal. Maybe it wasn't even comfortable. But it was mine. This life, this new chapter was mine to shape. I stood in front of the mirror that morning looking at my reflection. My hair, once neatly done every day, had grown wild, a bit unruly. My skin, too, was showing signs of aging, but my eyes, they were different. There was something in them now, a spark. A fire I hadn't realized was still there. Mr. Hawthorne's world, as rigid and polished as it was, had begun to seep into me. I had learned to follow his routine, yes, but I had also learned to let go of the things I'd been holding on to for so long. Grief, regret, fear, all those heavy things I had dragged along with me. Here with him, I could finally leave some of that weight behind. The truth, however, was that I hadn't figured everything out. One afternoon, as I was helping Mr. Hawthorne with his afternoon routine, I overheard a conversation between him and Patricia, the house manager. I had always considered Patricia to be an intimidating presence, never one to say much, but always watchful, always calculating. But this conversation was different. It was something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "I think we need to prepare for the worst," Patricia Mr. Hawthorne was saying. "Hilda's been here for a few weeks now, and I'm beginning to see something I hadn't expected. She's becoming more than a caregiver to me. I'm not sure what to do about that." The word struck me like a thunderclap. What did he mean by that? Was he acknowledging what I felt? The pull between us? Had he seen something in me that I wasn't aware of? Patricia's response was clipped sharp. "Don't make things more complicated than they need to be, sir. She's here to do a job, nothing more." "But she's not just doing a job, is she?" Mr. Hawthorne's voice was quieter now, more vulnerable. "I don't know if she even realizes it, but there's something about her. She reminds me of someone. Someone I thought I had lost forever." A chill ran down my spine, and I was frozen in place, hidden behind the corner of the hallway. I had never heard him speak this way before, so unsure, so raw. I had always assumed that Mr. Hawthorne's life was nothing but perfect control, a man who never let anything slip, never allowed anything to feel out of place. But now I realized there was much more to him than the powerful figure he presented to the world. There was hurt there. There was confusion. The conversation shifted, and I heard Patricia's voice soften as though trying to guide him. "Mr. Hawthorne, perhaps you should speak to her directly. Tell her what's going on. If this is more than just a professional relationship for you, then it's time to admit it." More than just a professional relationship. The words reverberated in my mind. What did that mean for me? What did it mean for him? I turned and walked back to my room, my mind whirling. I wasn't sure how I felt about this, about the way he was looking at me, but I was certain of one thing: things were about to get complicated. Later that evening, when Mr. Hawthorne asked me to join him for dinner in the smaller dining room, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. It was just the two of us, and the quiet between us felt heavy. There was a palpable tension in the air, something unspoken but undeniable. As I served him his meal, he looked up at me with those piercing blue eyes. "Hilda," he said, his voice low and steady, "I need to be honest with you." I paused, setting the silverware down. My heart began to beat faster. about what I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He inhaled sharply. About us, about what I've been feeling. These past few weeks, I've come to realize that I care about you more than I should, more than I expected. My breath caught in my throat. I was staring at him, unable to find the right words to respond. Was this happening? Was this really happening? I know I'm in no position to ask anything of you, he continued, his eyes searching mine. But I need to know if you feel the same. I stood there, frozen in place, the weight of his words pressing down on me. What was I supposed to say? This wasn't what I expected when I first arrived here. This wasn't what I had imagined for myself at 68. But as I looked into his eyes, I realized something. I had been living for others for so long that I had forgotten how to live for myself. And maybe, just maybe, this was my moment to reclaim that. I don't know. I whispered, my voice trembling. I never thought this would happen. I never thought I could feel this way again. His expression softened as if he understood. You don't have to decide now, but I needed you to know. I needed to be honest with you about what's been going on inside of me. I nodded, still uncertain of everything, but feeling the pull toward him in ways I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't the life I had planned, but maybe it was the life I needed. The next few days felt like a blur. Mr. Hawthorne's confession hung in the air like a heavy fog that wouldn't lift. Every time I looked at him, my heart would race, and I couldn't tell if it was from fear, excitement, or something else entirely. The warmth of his gaze lingered, and I couldn't help but replay his words over and over in my mind. I care about you more than I should. At 68, I had thought my days of uncertainty were behind me. I had already lived a full life. I had been a wife, a mother, a caregiver. What was left for me now? Could I really entertain the idea of stepping into a new relationship with a man like Terence Hawthorne? A man who had built his life on wealth and control. Someone who had his own set of expectations and responsibilities. I had spent most of my life taking care of others. Dante, my husband, had relied on me during his illness. Harlow had counted on me for everything. Her childhood, her education, and even her emotional needs. I had always been the one to give, to care, to support. But now, with Dante gone and Harlow having distanced herself from me, I was forced to look inward. For the first time in years, I was questioning what I needed. I was in my room that evening when there was a knock at the door. I hesitated for a moment before I answered it. When I opened the door, I found Mr. Hawthorne standing there looking every bit as poised as he always did despite the wheelchair. There was a somberness to him that I hadn't noticed before, a kind of vulnerability that only added to the weight of his presence. "Hilda," he said quietly, "can we talk?" I nodded and stepped aside to let him in. We both sat in the small sitting area in my room, the furniture plush and comfortable, but the silence between us was anything but. "I know I caught you off guard," he began, "but I didn't want to leave things unsaid. The last thing I want is for you to feel trapped in this arrangement. You didn't sign up for any of this. You came here to work, and I never meant for this to get complicated." I looked at him, the flicker of doubt in his eyes making me pause. It was clear he was not the cold, calculating businessman I had first thought him to be. He was a man who had been hurt, who had been living in his own form of isolation for years, and who was now vulnerable in ways he probably didn't understand. "I'm not sure what this is, Terence," I said softly. "I didn't come here looking for anything more than a place to stay, a job. But now I'm not so sure what I feel. I've never done this before, felt like this, I mean. It's all so new and strange." His lips curled into a small smile, one tinged with sadness. "I know. It's new for me too. But I want you to know, this isn't just about us. It's about what you want for yourself, Hilda. I'm not going to pressure you, but I can't ignore the way things have changed between us. I don't know how you feel, but I do know that I want to give you the space to decide what comes next. I looked down at my hands clasped in my lap. How had I gotten here? A few weeks ago, I was just a woman who had been thrown out of her own home by her own daughter, living in a guest room, and struggling to find my place in the world. Now I was sitting across from a man who made me feel like maybe there was more to life than just surviving. But was I ready for that? Could I be? I don't know if I'm ready for more, I admitted. But I'm also not ready to walk away from something that feels important. Maybe we don't have to figure everything out right now. Maybe we just see where this goes without any expectations. Terrence's eyes softened at my words, and for the first time, I saw something like hope in his gaze. He didn't speak for a moment, just watched me as if trying to gauge whether I was serious, whether this was just another one of my momentary hesitations, or if I truly meant what I was saying. "Take your time," he said finally. "We'll go at your pace, whatever that means. But just know this, I'm not going anywhere. I'm here." His words, his certainty, filled me with something I hadn't felt in a long time, comfort. I wasn't ready to give him my heart, not yet, but in that moment, I was ready to be open to the idea of something more. I was ready to stop holding myself back, to let myself see where this could go without the looming fear of rejection or loss. "I'm not sure what this will look like, Terrence," I whispered, "but I want to try. I don't know what that means yet, but I'm willing to find out." A small smile touched his lips, and he reached out to take my hand. His touch gentle but firm. "That's all I ask, Hilda. We'll take it one step at a time." The air between us shifted, then becoming something more. It was no longer just the two of us in a sterile mansion bound by duty and obligation. It was the beginning of something more intimate, something raw and real. I wasn't sure where it would lead, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe I wasn't too old for a new beginning after all. The days that followed felt like a slow unfolding of something I couldn't yet name. As the weeks passed, I began to learn the rhythms of Terrence's world just as he was learning to adjust to mine. We spent long mornings together in the conservatory, sipping coffee and talking about everything and nothing. He was curious, and it seemed like he was genuinely interested in who I was, not just as his caregiver, but as Hilda Thompson, the woman who had walked into his life without warning. I was still grappling with the strange mix of emotions that swirled within me. Guilt, excitement, fear, but mostly I felt something that I hadn't in years, peace. The mornings were calm, the house felt warm, despite its grandness, and for the first time since Dante had passed, I didn't feel invisible. I wasn't just a woman living in the shadow of her husband's memory. I was a person again, and it was all because of Terrence. We never spoke about the past directly. I had the letters, the photo albums, hidden away in my room, but I hadn't shown him any of them. I wasn't ready yet. Sometimes, late at night, I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how we had gotten here. How a man who had left me so long ago could come back into my life like this, and why it felt like we were picking up the pieces of a puzzle that had been scattered for decades. But it wasn't just the past that haunted me. I hadn't forgotten my daughter Harlow. I knew she had her own reasons for what she'd done, but part of me wondered if there was still a chance for us to reconcile. We hadn't spoken since our confrontation in the study, and I hadn't tried to reach out. My world had shifted so drastically that I wasn't sure where I stood with her anymore. I knew I had to face her eventually. There was no way around it. Harlow was part of my life, for better or worse, and whatever happened between Terrence and me, my daughter was still my daughter. One afternoon, as I was preparing tea in the kitchen, the doorbell rang. It was a sound I wasn't used to hearing in the middle of the day. I dried my hands and walked toward the door, my heart already beating faster. When I opened it, I was met with the last person I expected to see. "Harlow," I said, my voice tentative. She stood there, her posture stiff, but her eyes slightly red, as if she had been crying. The professional mask she always wore seemed to be slipping, revealing something I hadn't seen in years: vulnerability. She wasn't just the daughter who had thrown me out. She was also the girl who had once needed me more than anything in the world. She stopped herself as though the words had gotten caught in her throat. "I need to talk to you." I stepped aside silently, inviting her in. As she entered, I noticed how different she looked. She was still wearing that immaculate black suit, but there was a weariness to her expression that hadn't been there before. It was a look of someone who had been carrying too much for far too long. We sat down at the kitchen table, and for a moment neither of us spoke. Harlow was the first to break the silence. "Mom, I've been thinking about everything. About what I said. What happened between us. I was wrong." I blinked, surprised by the sincerity in her voice. "What do you mean?" "I've been so angry," she admitted, her voice cracking. "I didn't understand. I thought you were just moving on from Dad. But I didn't stop to think about how you must feel. I was so caught up in my own grief that I made you feel like you didn't matter." I took a deep breath, trying to process her words. Part of me wanted to embrace her right there, to hold her and tell her it would all be okay. But another part of me still felt the sting of what had happened. "I've had my own struggles too, Harlow," I said softly. "I never expected things to go the way they did. You pushed me out, and I've had to rebuild my life in a way I never thought I would at this stage. It's been hard, but it's also been freeing." She looked at me, her eyes searching mine for understanding. "I know. And I don't expect you to forgive me right away. But I want to try. I want to be a part of your life again, if you'll let me." I wasn't sure what to say. This was the daughter I had raised, the girl who had always needed my approval, my love. But I wasn't the same woman who had watched her grow up. I had changed, and I couldn't deny that I had built a new life for myself. A life that didn't include her, at least not in the way it once had. "I'm not sure where we go from here," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "but I'm willing to try too. But you have to understand something, Harlow. I found something here, someone. And it's not just about being a caregiver or a housekeeper. It's more than that." Her face softened as I spoke, and I saw the flicker of something between us. Understanding, maybe. "You mean Mr. Hawthorne?" she asked, her voice cautious. I nodded. "Yes. Terrence is more than just an employer. He's someone who's been there for me, who's made me feel like I'm more than just a widow. Like I'm still capable of love. I can't just erase that." There was a long pause. Harlow looked down at her hands clasped tightly together. "I know," she said softly. "I've been so focused on what I wanted, I didn't see what you needed. But I think I can understand it now. I think I can accept that you're not the same person I remember, and maybe that's okay." I reached out and took her hand in mine. "It's going to take time, Harlow, but I want us to be able to be a family again, in whatever way that looks like." She nodded slowly, and for the first time in what felt like forever, there was a glimmer of hope between us. Maybe we couldn't go back to what we had before, but maybe, just maybe, we could build something new. The weeks after Harlow's visit were quieter than I expected. The tension between us, though not gone, had softened. Harlow kept her distance, but she sent messages now and then. Simple things like asking about how Terrence was doing or if I needed anything. It wasn't a deep reconciliation, but it was a start. I had to admit to myself that I wasn't sure where our relationship would go from here, but I felt a flicker of hope. Terrence and I continued to settle into our new routine. Life at the Hawthorne mansion was strange in its peacefulness. I had always been the caretaker, the one who did everything for everyone else. But with Terrence, it felt different. There was something about him that made me feel like an equal, not just a caregiver. Even in the quiet moments when we simply sat together, I felt a bond growing between us, one that felt more real than anything I had ever experienced. We started going for walks around the garden together with him in his wheelchair and me beside him, our hands brushing occasionally. He had made so many changes in the house over the years, and the gardens were his pride and joy. He showed me where he had planted trees for his mother, where he had designed spaces for reflection and relaxation, and I could see the man he once was, the man who still had dreams, even if his body was confined to a wheelchair. Despite the growing intimacy, there were still days when I couldn't shake the feeling that I was living in someone else's life. Terrence had been rich and powerful long before I had ever entered his world. He had built empires and lost them, traveled the world, and seen things that I would never be able to understand. I had spent my life taking care of my family, and while I had known love, I hadn't known the kind of power Terrence wielded, nor the pain that came with it. I couldn't ignore the doubts that lingered in my mind. Was I truly part of his world now, or was I just a temporary diversion? And even if I was truly loved by him, was I just clinging to the comfort of something familiar, something I had lost decades ago? One evening after a long day of organizing the house, I found myself sitting with Terrence on the back porch. The sky was a deep purple stars beginning to twinkle above us, and the air was cool and crisp, the kind of night that reminded me of my childhood. "Do you ever think about what you lost?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. What might have been? Terrence looked at me, his blue eyes reflecting the light of the stars. "Every day," he said quietly, "I think about what I lost, about the dreams I left behind. But I also think about the man I became and how that man found you again. I don't regret what I've done, Hilda, even if it cost me everything. Because I still believe that what we had, what we still have, is worth more than anything I could have built with money." His words hung in the air between us, and I could feel the weight of them. Terrence had built his empire with ambition and sacrifice, but at what cost? He had lost so much. His first love, his family, his health. But in finding me again, was he finally beginning to feel that what he had built wasn't the only thing that mattered? "I never thought we'd be here," I said softly, my fingers tracing the edge of my teacup. "Not like this." "I didn't either," Terrence replied, his voice steady, "but I'm glad we are." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that this was real, that our shared history and the love we were beginning to rekindle could overcome everything that had happened between us and the years we had lost. But a part of me still felt uncertain. How could I be sure that I wasn't just a convenient distraction for him, a way to fill the loneliness of his life now that he had everything but the one thing he had always wanted? The next day, something unexpected happened. I was cleaning the kitchen when the doorbell rang. I looked up at the clock. It was just past noon and I wasn't expecting anyone. I hesitated before walking to the door. When I opened it, I was greeted by a man I hadn't seen in years. "Miss Thompson." The man said, his tone polite but formal. "I'm with the law firm handling Mr. Hawthorne's affairs. He asked me to stop by and speak with you." My stomach twisted. What's this about? The man stepped forward, his expression sympathetic. "It's regarding Mr. Hawthorne's will. There have been some recent developments." My heart began to race as I invited him inside. The last time I had heard anything about Terrence's will was before I had even come back into his life. I had no idea what he might have changed, but the knot in my stomach told me that whatever it wasn't going to be easy to hear. Terence had always been a private man, especially when it came to matters of money. The wealth he had built was extensive, but it had always seemed secondary to him. Still in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that there were things about him, about us, that I didn't fully understand. The lawyer, a middle-aged man with thin glasses, handed me a manila envelope. I've been instructed to go over some of the details with you. It's important. I took the envelope with trembling hands, my mind racing. Whatever this was, I knew it would be a turning point. For better or for worse, my future with Terence and with my daughter was about to change. I sat at the kitchen table, my hands shaking as I opened the manila envelope. The lawyer, whose name I had barely caught in my anxiety, sat across from me, watching me with an unreadable expression. I felt the weight of the moment pressing down on me, and for a second I wished I could just go back to the days before everything changed, before Dante's death, before the will, before everything that had brought me back into Terence's life. I unfolded the papers carefully, my eyes scanning the legal language, the terms, and the conditions. There was something here that made my heart race, something that was too important to ignore. The lawyer's voice interrupted my thoughts. Mr. Hawthorne has made some significant changes to his estate, he began. He's asked that a substantial portion of his wealth be allocated to charitable foundations, as you may have heard. However, there is a specific clause that directly concerns you. My heart skipped a beat. What could this mean? Was this about me? About the relationship I had with him? About my life from this moment forward? The lawyer continued, and I forced myself to focus. Terence Hawthorne has named you as a primary beneficiary in his will, he said. You are not only entitled to a generous sum, but you also have the option to live here for the rest of your life, with the full benefits of this estate. This includes financial support, care for your medical needs, and any other expenses you may have. This provision will not be altered regardless of future events. I blinked in confusion. What was he saying? A part of me was overwhelmed with the gravity of the situation, but another part felt a little incredulous. This was Terence. He had always been generous, yes, but this was much more than I had ever expected. I had never dreamed that he might leave me so much, let alone make these arrangements for me in the long term. Wait, I said, trying to process it. So he's leaving me everything. The lawyer nodded. Yes, Mrs. Thompson. But it is important to understand that these are contingent on you continuing your relationship with Mr. Hawthorne, whatever form that takes. You are not simply being left wealth or property. You are being given the opportunity to be part of Mr. Hawthorne's life moving forward. His hope is that you will be there for him as you've been in whatever capacity you can. I felt the weight of his words settling in. This wasn't just about the money. It wasn't just about the house, the estate, the wealth. It was about commitment, about being there for him, not just as his caregiver, but as something more. Could I do that? Could I be there for him, truly, after everything that had happened? The lawyer was speaking again, but I wasn't really hearing him anymore. My mind was racing, thinking of all the possibilities and all the consequences. I was overwhelmed by the thought of all this, of everything I had once thought was lost, now laid out before me. As if reading my mind, the lawyer gave me a moment before speaking again. This decision is yours, Mrs. Thompson. If you choose to accept Mr. Hawthorne's terms, you will not be alone. The house, his assets, the foundations he's supporting, they will be yours to use as you see fit, and you will always have a place here. But if you refuse... I won't refuse, I said, cutting him off. The words came out before I could stop them, but it felt right. I don't know if I understand everything, but I won't refuse. The lawyer gave me a reassuring nod, his expression softening. Then, if you accept, the formalities will be handled immediately. And you'll be able to meet with Mr. Hawthorne and discuss the next steps in person. I nodded, still processing everything. I thought of Terrence, of the man I had known, and the man he was becoming. Could I really do this? Could I step into this new chapter with him, knowing that so much had been left unsaid between us?
The lawyer stood to leave, but before he did, he paused. One last thing he said, his tone gentle. "There's a letter for you, Mrs. Thompson, from Mr. Hawthorne. He's requested that you read it when you're ready."
I took the letter from him, the weight of it in my hands almost too much to bear. As he left, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the envelope. Terrence had written me a letter. I had no idea what was inside, but I could feel the urgency in the air, a sense of fate I couldn't escape. I opened it carefully, my hands trembling. It wasn't long, just a few pages folded neatly inside, but the words were enough to make everything inside me tighten.
"Dear Hilda, I've been thinking about our future for a long time now, and I know I've made mistakes. I've kept you at a distance, closed myself off, afraid of letting anyone in, especially you. But in the time that we've spent together, I've realized that the love we once shared didn't die. It simply went into hiding, buried beneath the years of hurt and missed opportunities. I can't change the past, but I want to change the future. What I offer you now isn't just a second chance, it's a promise. A promise that I'll be there for you, that we'll make new memories together, no matter what comes next. The estate, the wealth, everything I've built, I want to share it with you. Not because I think you need it, but because I want you to have it. I want you to have me. I can't ask you to forgive me for everything, but I can ask you to give me a chance to prove that I'm not just the man I was. I want to be the man who deserves you, Hilda. Whatever form that takes, I want you by my side as my equal, as the woman I've always loved. With love. Terrence Hawthorne. I stared at the letter, my heart beating fast. It was everything I had wanted to hear, everything I had feared. Terrence wasn't just offering me wealth or a place in his life. He was offering me a future, a life with him, the kind of life we had once dreamed of. But could I accept it? Could I really take him at his word? Could I trust that he was offering me everything, not just a piece of his life? The question swirled in my mind, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel completely alone. Maybe, just maybe, there was a future here. Not just for us, but for me too. The days following the lawyer's visit were a blur. I spent most of my time lost in thought, wrestling with the magnitude of what Terrence had offered me. His letter weighed heavily on my heart, and though I had promised myself I wouldn't make rash decisions, part of me knew that I had already made up my mind. It was clear now that the future I had dreamed of with Dante was gone, and perhaps it was time to accept that. But did I truly want this new life? Was I ready to embrace a past that had been buried for so many years? As the morning sun streamed through the conservatory windows, I found myself standing there lost in thought. The garden outside was as beautiful as ever, the flowers blooming with a vibrancy that matched the promise of something new. But within me, the struggle continued. How could I let go of my past and step into a future I wasn't entirely sure of? How could I trust Terrence again, knowing all the years that had passed without him in my life? I had barely registered the sound of the wheels of Terrence's chair rolling into the room until he spoke. "Hilda." His voice was soft, almost hesitant. "I don't want to pressure you, but I also don't want you to think that this is just about money or convenience. I care about you. I always have." I turned to face him, meeting his gaze. His eyes were filled with sincerity, and something deep within me stirred. Could I really do this? Could I let go of the pain and disappointment and embrace this second chance? "You've already done so much for me," I said quietly, my voice shaky. You've given me a home, a future, and I'm so grateful for that. But Terrence, I can't pretend that everything is perfect. I still have doubts, and I need time to process everything." He nodded, understanding. "I know, Hilda, and I'm not asking you to make a decision right away. Just, I want you to know that I'm here. I'm here for you no matter what you decide." His words settled into my heart like a gentle balm. There was no rush, no pressure. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I had the space to think, to breathe, and to make my own choices. As I spent the next few days thinking through my options, the weight of my daughter's betrayal lingered in the back of my mind. Harlow's cold treatment, her ultimatum, and her disregard for everything I had done for her over the years, it had all been so hurtful. I couldn't shake the memory of how she had looked at me when she threw me out of her home as if I were nothing more than a burden to be discarded. The anger and sadness I had felt toward her were still raw, and I didn't know if I could ever forgive her for what she had done. I needed answers. I needed closure. And so one afternoon I called her. I wasn't sure what I would say, but I knew that it was time to face the truth. "Harlow," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside, "I need to talk to you." She answered on the first ring, her voice tight. "What is it, Mom?" "I'm not calling to argue," I said. I need you to understand something." There was a long silence on the other end, and for a moment, I wasn't sure if she would hang up. But then she spoke again. "All right," she said, her tone softer now. "Go ahead."
"I don't want to live with resentment between us," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "I know you've been angry with me. I know you feel like I abandoned you, but that's not what happened. I've done everything I could to support you and your family, but I can't keep doing it if it means losing myself in the process."
There was another silence, but this time it wasn't as uncomfortable. This time it felt like she was listening. "I've made a lot of mistakes," Harlow finally said, her voice tight. "I've been angry and hurt, and I took it out on you. I shouldn't have done that, Mom." I closed my eyes, feeling the sting of tears behind them. "I know, sweetheart, but I also need to tell you that I can't live for you anymore. I can't keep sacrificing my own happiness just to make you feel better." "I understand," she said quietly. "I really do, and I'm sorry." The words felt like a weight being lifted from my shoulders, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. Harlow wasn't the same person she had been when she threw me out of her house, and perhaps I wasn't either. We both had our flaws, our mistakes, but that didn't mean we couldn't start over. "I'm not asking for your approval, Harlow," I said gently, "but I need you to respect my choices. I'm moving forward and I want you to come with me, but if you can't, I'll understand." "I don't know if I'm ready for that," Harlow admitted, her voice cracking slightly, "but I'll try. I really will." That was enough for me. It wasn't an apology, but it was progress, and sometimes progress was all you could ask for. That evening, when I met Terrence in the conservatory, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't experienced in months. We had both done the hard work of facing our pasts, and now we had the chance to build something new, together. "Hilda," Terrence said, his voice warm, "I spoke to my lawyer today. The changes to the will stand. I just want you to know that whatever happens, I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." I smiled, feeling a strange sense of peace settle over me. "Thank you," I whispered. "I'm here too, and I think I'm ready to try." As I looked at him, I realized that this wasn't about the money or the house. It was about us, about the chance to rebuild something that had been lost. And as I reached for his hand, I knew that no matter what the future held, we would face it together. The following weeks felt like a slow unfolding of a new chapter. I found myself waking up each day with a sense of anticipation, something I hadn't felt in years. The house felt different now. It wasn't just a place to live anymore. It had become a home once again, full of new memories in the making.
I spent my mornings with Terence in the conservatory, the same place where we had faced so many truths together. We'd share coffee talk about the past, the present, and our plans for the future. It was simple, peaceful, and it was exactly what I needed. One afternoon, as I was walking through the gardens, I was struck by the sheer beauty of everything around me. The flowers, the trees, the meticulously maintained lawn, all of it seemed to reflect the way my life was slowly transforming. The pain from the past was still there, but it wasn't all-consuming anymore. Instead, I had a newfound appreciation for the little moments, like the way Terence's laugh still made my heart skip a beat, or how he insisted on taking me to dinner at the little bistro down the street whenever I had a rough day. It was the kind of love that didn't need grand gestures. It just needed presence. One evening, as I was preparing dinner in the kitchen, I felt a sudden rush of gratitude for this life I had found myself in. I had always thought that love was something that only came once in a lifetime, but now, sitting in this house with Terence by my side, I realized that love wasn't just about the past. It was about choosing someone again and again every day. And I had chosen him. Terence had chosen me.
Hilda, his voice interrupted my thoughts. We need to talk.
I turned, startled by the seriousness in his tone. "What's wrong?" I asked, my heart skipping a beat.
"I've been thinking a lot lately," he began, wheeling his chair toward me. "About the future. About us." I felt a flutter of nervous excitement in my chest. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he said, looking at me with those piercing blue eyes, "I don't want to waste any more time. I've had my share of regrets, but I don't want to live with more. I don't want you to live with more." I stepped closer, sensing where this conversation might be headed. "Terence, what are you saying?" He smiled a soft, tender smile that made my heart swell. "I'm saying that I want to build the rest of my life with you, Hilda. Not just as a companion, but as my wife." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with meaning. I felt my breath catch in my throat. This wasn't just about the past, about lost time. This was about what we could build together now. "You mean it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "You really want that?" He reached for my hand, his grip warm and steady. "I've loved you for so long, Hilda. I've carried you with me through every success, every failure, every mistake. But now, I want to make things right. I want to give you the love you deserve." Tears filled my eyes, blurring my vision. I never thought I could have this. I never thought I could have love like this again. "You don't have to think about it anymore," he said softly. "You have it, right here, with me." I smiled through my tears, feeling the weight of the past lift off my shoulders. There were no more questions, no more doubts. Just love. Just us. A few weeks later, in a small ceremony at our home, I became Mrs. Hawthorne. It wasn't the grand wedding I had once imagined as a young girl, but it was perfect. Surrounded by a few close friends, including Patricia and Brian, we exchanged vows in the same conservatory where we had rediscovered our love. It was intimate, quiet, and full of meaning. As I looked into Terence's eyes, I saw not just the man he had become, but the young man I had loved so many years ago. The love that had never really died, that had been waiting patiently for us to find our way back to each other. "I do," I whispered, my voice trembling with emotion. "I do," he replied, his eyes soft with affection. And just like that, we sealed our promise with a kiss, beginning the next chapter of our lives together. The days that followed were filled with joy, peace, and the kind of contentment I hadn't known in years. Terence's health had improved not just physically, but emotionally. With each passing day, I saw more of the man he had been: vibrant, full of dreams, passionate about life, and less of the man who had closed himself off from the world out of fear and loneliness. We spent our mornings in the conservatory reading, talking, and simply enjoying each other's company. At night, we would have dinner together often with a glass of wine and discuss our plans for the future. We talked about traveling, about spending our golden years, doing the things we had always wanted to do. There was no rush, no pressure, just the comfort of knowing we had time. Of course, life wasn't perfect. Harlow still hadn't fully come to terms with our relationship, and there were moments of tension between us. But there were also moments of reconciliation. Slowly, she began to soften, and after months of difficult conversations, we reached a place where we could begin to rebuild our relationship. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. I had come to realize that love, like life, was complicated. It wasn't always neat and tidy, but it was real. And in the end, that's all that mattered. As I sat in the conservatory one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I reflected on everything that had brought me here. The loss, the pain, the regrets, but also the love. The love that had been waiting for me all along. I looked at Terrence sitting beside me, his hand in mine. And for the first time in years, I felt complete. I had found my way home.